Hey, Tim. I think it's the last one. So I wanted to wrap this up. I know that you have lots of things to do, and I wanted to remind you to bring your towel. And once you have your towel, when you go off into space, because every hitchhiker and traveler needs to bring their towel, but you can do something very nice in this isometric stretch with your towel right overhead and keep it right over the head and hold and pull. And then you can relax it, and then you can let it down and then bring it overhead, hold and pull. So bring your towel on your trip. And I'm certain that anybody that's out there that has read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy will know exactly what it is to bring a towel. More importantly, we've talked about touch. And the last video was Professor McClone, who helped write this particular book with his colleagues in Sweden about how the skin brings in information and how very soft and light touch is extremely important to the development of the brain and emotions and also decision making. And whether the body's making the decision or we are making the decision, hard to say. But the body's making decisions all the time that are completely in the background and non-conscious. And that's a very good thing for us. So why we want to keep your human pressure suit active and all the sensors active is because they are an ecosystem and they work together in order to help you and your body make decisions at split seconds to benefit your well-being so that your pressure suit is reliable and it is reusable. So when we learn to use our senses and they synchronize, things are so much easier for the body to make the decision. So we're going to go to a couple visuals in order for us to understand that. But this is a great book. A lot of people don't have time to read. It's too bad. So there's a documentary on the BBC called The Man Who Lost His Body, and Ian Waterman looks to have a movement disorder when he walks, but it's because his vision has to take over. And this is a man who sleeps with the light on because when he wakes up, if he can't see his body, his arms, his legs, he can't move them. He has muscle, and the muscle has information from the nervous system. Yet there is a disconnect. Something is not syncing. And what do I mean by syncing? I think that's where we have to bring in some visuals in order for you to understand more about what I mean by syncing. Hey, Tim, I'll just tell you that the reason I like talking to you is because you're a normal guy. A lot of times we get this crazy idea and thinking that we can't have conversations with others about interesting ideas because they might not understand us. But for some reason, it just seems like one Iowan to another. Hopefully you'll have an appreciation for something like what I'm talking about. You're the astronaut, I'm the somanaut. Somanaut just means somebody that is kind of exploring the body and what what our bodies can do. Your body's going to be with you forever, and finding ways to make sure that there's not accelerated aging, and also when you come back from microgravity, that things aren't so wonky for you is the number one goal. What I want to talk about here is how our senses, and not just the 5 senses that we have all talked about, which a lot of times we think of taste receptors as just being for taste. with the sour and the sweet, but also its texture. And because there's textures, these are mechanoreceptors. These are mechanical pressure sensors that we have in the mouth that detect textures. And there's some people that will spit out as soon as something slimy goes in their mouth because it's slimy. That texture is not something they appreciate and they will spit it out. Babies put a lot of things in their mouth and they're trying to figure out what's the right thing to eat and what's the wrong thing to eat. When senses synchronize and all the input comes together and it really works well. We've talked about baffles before. Here's an acoustic baffle, and every sense that is represented here starts to hit the same target. And for us, when it comes to learning, we take these physical inputs and it helps our brain develop. Now, the thing is, we have a picture here of Faith Dickey. Her feet are on a wire and she's over a canyon and she's walking. And because these feet are so sensitive with pressure sensors, it is important for her body to maintain the balance, but you're going to lose the balance. And so if we can stimulate your feet, just as simple as having NASA have some Velcro and then the Velcro, the male and female parts, the other part on your socks, so you can walk on Velcro while you're in microgravity, would be a great way to stimulate these receptors on the bottom of your feet. So when things are out of sync, we get motion sick. Our touch does not sync up with the vision. The vestibular, the balance doesn't sync up with what the eyes are seeing. And your sense of proprioception is also out of sync. So here we have a vestibular, and a lot of times when we talk about motion sickness, we talk about the inner ear and the position changing. What we're not talking about often is proprioception. And for this particular man who was 19 years old and had a virus, and then woke up in the hospital and all of the proprioception sensors have disappeared. He seems to have a movement disorder, but he has more a lack of sensation. And these deficits are really important for any astronaut and somanaut and person that is aging to understand, because we can get them back and we can train them. So when it comes to motion sickness, the more often that we have a better sense, a development of vestibular sense, the less likely we are to be motion sick. And if we are motion sick, then we change positions in the car from the back seat to the front seat, from the front seat passenger to maybe the driver, so that the hands are on the steering wheel, to get these sensations back in sync, so it's easier to have the body make a decision. Here's somebody that uses all of his senses, not just the 5, but completely other senses too, and they're synced up. And with his sword, he can hit a high-speed ping pong ball coming at him, and he can slice it in half. And it's because he's using every sense possible. When we use our senses, it's physical input. And that physical input, even a sound, even a story, which you can tell with your pictures. When you take a picture and you share it with somebody, that is a story. And that's a visual story. We can also tell stories. And that has to come in through the ears, and this thin, nice tympanic membrane, just like the fascia that we have in our bodies, vibrates. And that vibration, that physical sense, changes, and there's liquid. And that liquid then changes how hair cells behave. Now, the difference is We can hear the same sound, but our reaction to that sound could be different. So usually a car alarm, we're going to know. A tornado siren, you and I live in Iowa. We know exactly what it is. And from the time that we're young, we have tornado drills at school. We know exactly what we need to do. Somebody from Sweden that's never been in a tornado wouldn't understand what that signal means. So it is important to use our senses. More importantly, I would like you to know that this system that we have underneath our skin and our skin called fascia is going through a nice little renaissance of let's figure this out. An Italian doctor, an orthopedic surgeon, wrote this book in 2015. Very detailed pictures, which are not easy to show on a kid's channel here, about the human body. And just like the sleeve I have here, this sleeve is very protective, and this is very protective. And those sleeves, the crural fascia of our lower leg, and the arm, the brachial fascia of the arm, that brachial fascia connects the hand to the head. And that crural fascia connects the foot to the hip and the low back. These are important things for you to know as an astronaut, because there's things that you can do in microgravity that will help support the sliding and the gliding that happens with this tissue underneath our skin to do the same things that Professor McClone has talked about. Our skin is giving us information throughout the body and our fascia to create changes in our brain. So physical entrainment is doing a learning process again and again and again, just like the tornado drill here in Iowa. It does a lot for helping the senses learn. Physical entrainment leads to neural entrainment and how the body develops. So Tim, what we see here is about pressure sensors, mechanoreceptors. Mechano just means pressure. And where do these live? A lot of people say that live in the fascia, but they live in tissues. And endothelial cells, as Dr. Berkanos has explained in her different books, working with NASA, that the endothelial cells, as these three different pictures will show, B and C, no problem, but A is showing deterioration of the endothelial cells of an animal that has been in space for 9 to 10 days. Now, endothelial cells, as the definition goes, is associated with the vasculature, blood vessels, in all tissues. These cells play a major role in the trafficking of other cells in and out of tissue, and may play a major role in determining tissue metabolism. So the endothelium is stimulated by the shear force as of the blood as it flows through. And as the blood flows through, the shear force stimulates the endothelium to produce a gas called nitric oxide. We've talked about this on an earlier video. So this is a repeat, but this hemodynamics that is happening in the blood vessels affects the heart. Blood vessels affects the heart. It affects baroreceptors, which live in the carotid arteries. And if the tension is too high or too low, even on skeletal muscles, that will also change what happens. The sliding and the gliding action is incredibly important. And I showed you about the sweatshirt here. This brachial fascia helps the head to connect to the arm and the chest. Also in the legs, we have the crural fascia. And as Dr. Verkanos has said, this microgravity on humans is similar to accelerated aging and bed rest. And maybe the similarity between those two, bed rest, accelerated aging, and microgravity, is a sensory deficit in pressure sensors. And the earlier slideshow, she says every system in the body is affected. Astronauts have insulin resistance, muscle atrophy, bone loss, a smaller heart that pumps less effectively. The transit time in the gut is slower, and everything else, everything is affected. So here we talk about something else. And this comes from two occupational therapist women, Mary Sue Williams and Sherry Schellenberger. And this was in 1996. They started in 1991, but in 1996, they made the Pyramid of Learning, which is a visual of how these senses are all part of the central nervous system. And these physical inputs come in: tactile, vestibular, proprioception, taste, listening, visual, vision, and smell, to build postural security, awareness of two sides of the body, motor planning, how to reach out the arm in order to pick something up, the ability to screen input, the reflex maturity, the body scheme. And we know from girls that are anorexic or bulimic, their body scheme is totally out of proportion and out of sync with the physical. So academic learning is at the very top. We have Ardam Pataputian again because his lab created so many different incredible things for us to know about. But I will say, and I will end with, the PZO1 and the PZO2 ion channels, which maybe you haven't thought twice about, and you don't have to, because when they're present, they're working. But when PZO1 channels, which are stimulated and activated by pressure, when they're not available, when they're not working, we have more problems with lymphedema and having the tissues drain, and especially in the extremities, in the arms and the legs, and even in the abdomen. And this mechanical ability for our body, mechanotransduction, as we talked about before, is also incredibly important for touch pain. In the lungs, people are more likely to have asthma if they're having sensory deficits. In the eye, glaucoma, high and low pressure. The kidneys, also kidney disease. The bone, osteoporosis. The blood vessels, hypertension. The inner ear, deafness. And sensory neurons, pain. So, where are we going to go with this? I'm going to wish you well with your towel. I'm going to say, have a wonderful trip. If there's any possibility of chatting, our mutual friend will get us in touch with each other. But I hope in the future there will be gentle touch mattresses, if not in your spacesuit, on the bed that you're sleeping on. Maybe your towel that you'll take with you, since you are a galactic hitchhiker, will be used as isometric in order to help the sliding and gliding system that we have inside the body work well. I'll end with a picture of Freja. which is pretty cool because I'm here in Scandinavia. And as Freja shows us, she is a plastination made by Gunther von Hagen's lab in Guben, Germany. And Body Worlds is exhibiting her in Berlin. She was created in order to explain how anatomy is interconnected, how the head is interconnected to the arm, and the nerves and the blood vessels are all in here. There's not a separation of these. The way classical anatomy has been done, it's very easy to understand or to think that they're all separate, but they're interwoven. So in Scandinavia, in Nordic countries, there was goddesses and gods. We've almost all heard of Thor. We've heard of Odin. Well, we might not have heard of Freja, which could be Frigg, who was married to Odin. But Freja is spelled differently based on different stories and traditions and who the speaker is, because we have different languages. Your babblefish and my babblefish will say this word differently. I translate this word differently. Nonetheless, she was beloved, she was adored by many, and she had the ability to predict the future, prophecy, and she could give health and she could take it away. And our human pressure suit will do the same. So we need to find ways to take care of it. And a shout out to another person from Iowa, Dr. Adrienne Woolley. She helped in one of the critical stages of putting together this plastination project, and on her own dime went over to Guben, Germany to work along with several other individuals, somanauts from around the world, to work on the heart, to work on the Freja, the final installation, so we can understand about the interconnectedness of our anatomy. Yeah. So this is series number 4 and part 4. And in honor of MZ, since he's from Japan, 4 is an unlucky number. This particular one will be named 3B. So, dear Tim and your moon crew, enjoy yourselves. Maybe we'll talk later. Okay.